Hello, I'm Chris Sherrick, Communications Director of the Society of Broadcast Engineers, and welcome to the SBE WEBxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. This is a monthly SBE meeting, usually posted on the third Monday of the month. The SBE is the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals with more than 4,000 members, mostly in the U.S., but also around the world. Today's guest is someone I'll bet a lot of people know because of his series of engineers' mini notebooks or lab books that he wrote for Radio Shack. He's also written many other books and contributed articles to a variety of publications on a wide range of scientific topics. He's the author of Maverick Scientist. Personally, his mini notebooks fueled my early electronics understanding. Maybe they fueled yours as well. Our guest is Forrest Mims. But first, I have your SBE member update for August 17, 2026. On August 6, Stefan Lederberger presents Beyond the Wire, Why Control is the Real Challenge in IP Production and How NMOS Helps. This webinar surveys today's control system approaches and their differences. Then it gives an overview of the open NMOS specifications, from registration and connection management to the growing NMOS control family. On August 20, Fred Engel leads ATSC 3.0, Datacasting and Public Safety Applications. This webinar provides an overview of the technology driving ATSC 3.0, including the enhanced viewer experience and the ability to use and deliver data for non-viewer applications. Engel will also provide his view of the current deployment of this exciting technology. More webinars are added all the time, and you can always access the entire library of webinars by SBE presentations on demand. For information on these and all the webinars by SBE, go to sbe.org/webinars. The SBE holds SBE Ennis workshops throughout the year in various cities. There are 3 more SBE Ennis workshops on the calendar for this year: August 25 and 26 in Biloxi, Mississippi, September 26 in Atlanta, and October 19 in Wichita, Kansas. Get more on these upcoming workshops and learn how you can bring one to your area at sbe.org/NS-workshops. 2025 marked the 50th anniversary of SBE certification. To recognize the occasion, the SBE program of certification is challenging you to upgrade or obtain your certification through November 2026. Take the CERT Challenge and you will not only further your professional standing, you could win a great prize. The SBE is also encouraging chapters to hold a meeting to discuss the benefits of SBE certification. This is called CERT Connect, and you can get all the details on both at sbe.org/CERTConnect. The next chapter exam window is in August. That application date is now behind us. After that, there's a local chapter exam window in November. The application deadline for that is September 7. And if you don't want to wait, or if a local chapter exam is not convenient for you or not possible for some reason, private proctoring is available. More information on SBE certification is online at sbe.org/certification. The SBE National Meeting heads to Madison, Wisconsin this year. It will be held September 15 and 16 in conjunction with the Midwest Regional Broadcasters Clinic, presented by the State Broadcast Associations and SBE chapters of Wisconsin and Minnesota. The SBE National Meeting includes the SBE Membership Meeting, which includes updates on the projects and activities of the Society, presentation of the annual SBE Award recipients, and the swearing in of officers and directors for the new terms. The meeting will be recorded and presented as the October SBE WEBxtra for local chapters to view. The clinic is being held September 15th and 16th at the Madison Marriott West in Middleton, Wisconsin. It includes 2 full days of learning and networking designed specifically with broadcast engineers in mind. It provides an opportunity to explore best practices, compliance guidance, and the latest technology and equipment available. Get more information about the Midwest Regional Broadcasters Clinic at broadcastersclinic.com. Details on the SBE National Meeting are online as well at sbe.org/national-meeting. And that's your SBE member update for August 17, 2026. Our guest today is likely a familiar name to anyone who shopped at Radio Shack in the 1970s through 1990s. I recall seeing a series of booklets titled Engineer's Mini Notebooks with projects covering op amps, optoelectronics, 555 timers, and many, many more topics. He authored other books for Radio Shack as well. For me, these mini notebooks were part of my early electronics education. I had built some kits, but these booklets actually taught me how various integrated circuits and other devices worked and worked together. Radio Shack sold more than 7 million copies of that series. Not long ago, I was on Facebook and I saw a post from the author of those books from my younger days. The post was not about electronics, so it really caught my eye. I clicked on his name and was delighted to see it was, in fact, the same man who taught me through his books about electronics. This man is Forrest M. Mims III. In 2024, Mims published a memoir titled Maverick Scientist. He's been named one of the 50 best brains in science by Discover magazine. In the book, he shares what sparked his childhood curiosity and relates a lifetime of improbable, dramatic, and occasionally outright dangerous experiences in the world of science. At 13, he invented a new method of rocket control. At 17, he designed and built an analog computer that could translate Russian into English. While majoring in government at Texas A&M University, he created a handheld radar-like device to help guide the blind. And during his military service, he had to be given special clearance to do top-secret laser research at the Air Force Weapons Lab, because while he lacked the required engineering degree, they wanted his outside-the-box thinking on the project. He co-founded MITS Inc., producer of the first commercially successful personal computer, the Altair 8800. He designed the music synthesizer circuit that became known as the infamous Atari Punk console, and wrote the series of books for Radio Shack that I mentioned earlier. He's consulted for NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center and NOAA's Mauna Loa Observatory, and earned the prestigious Rolex Award. Of course, we'll talk about the Radio Shack books he authored and learn about his other work in a variety of scientific areas. So once again, hello, Forrest, and welcome to the SBE WEBxtra. How are you today?
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So am I. As I mentioned in the introduction, when I just looking through Facebook one day and I saw your name pop up on a post and I thought, wait, is that really the same guy? And I've told some of my other broadcast engineering friends that I was going to talk to you today, and they all got quite excited because, like me, they kind of picked up and got their interest in electronics through the books that, I think many of us know from Radio Shack. Got a few of them here that I have in my hand and pulled off my shelf. The mini notebooks in particular, but that's not it. And that's only a small part of your, let's say, scientific contributions that we're going to talk about. So I've done a lot of talking already. Let's, as long as I've done the Radio Shack thing, let's start there. As I mentioned, that's how a lot of people are going to know your name, at least from the broadcast engineering circles. How did that relationship with Radio Shack begin?
Oh boy, I helped to found the company MITS Incorporated that developed the Altair microcomputer, and that's where Microsoft was started in Albuquerque. And
Oh, okay.
while I was there, I wrote some of my first magazine articles while I was working at MITS. And Howard Sams and Company noticed this, and they started hiring me to write electronic books. And I wrote 18 of them for them.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, they were publishing Radio Shack's books,
Right.
and they asked if I'd like to write those, and I said sure. And that's how that got started. The Radio Shack book sales dwarfed everything I was doing for the publisher on before Radio Shack.
Sure. Wow.
Those
Um,
hand-lettered books, the hand lettered books sold 7.3 million copies, uh, but they've been sold. They're on Amazon now. I don't know. They're not selling that magnitude, but
right.
they've been ripped off all across the planet.
Yeah, I've seen all sorts of scanned and bootleg posted PDFs of them all over the place. Um, and I did see that, yeah, they're available through Amazon as well. And you'll find copies on eBay and Etsy and a lot of places I've seen
Yeah,
people who've pulled them off the shelf and have put them up for sale. So they're quite the
yeah.
classic. So there are how many mini notebooks in this series? Do you remember?
There's there were there were two full-size books on all kinds of electronic components, and then there was Getting Started in Electronics. That sold 1.5 million copies, and Radio Shack was stunned. I was stunned. It was like a bestseller, and the mini notebooks began after the success of Getting Started in Electronics. Getting Started in Electronics is a 8.5 by 11 format, 128 pages, and it took about 6 weeks to produce that book. They let me use pencil. The first two books were done with India ink, and it actually caused my finger to bleed, holding that India ink pen. And if you made one
Ouch.
mistake, you had to redo the entire
Oh,
page. But with a 7/10 millimeter pencil, I could just erase my mistakes.
well, there you go. The modern equivalent of backspace,
There you go. Yes,
or the
exactly.
ancient equivalent, I should say.
Yeah.
So, in addition to I have a note here that on the mini notebooks alone, those sold more than 7 million copies.
The mini notebooks have sold 7.3 million.
Wow,
That number ended. That's almost a 15-year-old number. So I don't know what they've sold since then.
sure. Well, of course, Radio Shack disappeared and has sort of come back in a different form anymore. But
Yeah,
the old days of Radio Shack are long behind us. Um,
unfortunately.
yeah, unfortunately. Which kind of leads me to the next question I had. What do you think of the current state of hobby electronics today versus 30, 40 years ago?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I haven't given that a lot of thought, but I've got some ideas. Number one, there's a lot less experimenting going on today because of the of easy availability of devices built with microprocessors.
Sure.
And then number two, microprocessor kits have become very popular. Uh, but as one gentleman mentioned a few days ago in an email, I get all these emails from people. He said these kids are missing out on how simple it is to build a 555 light flasher. Instead, they're having to write code to do that with a microprocessor. That's a
Uh-huh.
very good point because it's highly over complex for such a simple chore.
Sure. It's
The other
funny
way,
you mentioned the 555 timer, and that actually is one of the reasons I had to pull my books off the shelf. So yeah, on the 555 timer, it's interesting you mentioned that because I had a situation a couple of years ago where I had to build a light flasher to be activated from a doorbell for a band rehearsal space where the door is
oh,
separated from the rehearsal room by a
mhm.
distance. And of course, if the band's playing, you're never going to hear anybody knocking on a door or ringing a bell anyway. And my first thought was, well, that's a couple of 555 timers. So I pulled your book off the shelf and took one to take the one shot bell to a sustained pulse, and another one to do the light flashing on and off every 5 seconds. And boom, with a couple of chips, capacitors, resistors, and a power supply, I had a flasher circuit ready to go.
Good
All,
for you. You
all
just made my
thanks to
day.
all thanks to this
Oh,
little book.
that's it. You made my day.
Some 30, 40 years later, and I'm still using it. So
What's the date on that? Does that book have the date on it?
this one is, let's see, it's the third edition. Sorry, it's the fourth printing, 96.
Yeah,
Original copyright was 1984. So
they were
it's,
printing those. They were printing those in batches of 100,000.
wow. And selling them almost as quickly as they probably printed
Oh
them,
yeah,
I'll bet.
they were
So,
shipping my books in 18 wheelers. You believe that?
wow. That's amazing. One more question on the mini notebooks. When you were designing or are you creating these sample circuits, were you I don't want to say forced steered perhaps to using parts that one could get from Radio Shack,
Yeah,
or what? Yes, okay. Or I was going to say it was just kind
they
of.
wanted it had to be 100% Radio Shack.
I kind of figured. I mean, that's you don't go to Radio Shack. Oh, sorry, I need this part, but you don't sell it. That doesn't make any sense, right? I was kind of thinking that might have been the case. Well, that's very cool. So, and you mentioned a couple of other books, and then we'll get off the Radio Shack hook. You had written for them. Again, was this all through Sam's? Were they the actual publisher on these?
Sam's didn't publish any of the hand lettered books, only the print books, and they published all of those.
Oh, okay.
The
Okay.
the hand lettered, we went to different printers for the hand printed books. In fact, Dave Gunzel was Radio Shack's editor, and he took me up to Bonta to see how they actually printed my books. That was quite an experience.
I bet. I worked in trade publications for a number of years as well. So
Oh, okay.
I never got to the printing press. Yeah, I was the editor of Radio Magazine for 17 years,
Is that right?
which was a spin-off of Broadcast Engineering Magazine, which at one time was published by Sam's years ago,
Oh, amazing,
years
amazing.
and years ago.
Well, see,
So
Sam's published. You probably knew my editor, Howard Harrington. Donald Harrington was my editor.
by the time I got to the magazine, we were Intertech Publishing and then some others. So I can't say I ever knew
Uh,
him directly, although our paths may have crossed and I just didn't realize it at some point.
my
So,
first book for them was Semiconductor Diode Lasers, which was the first laser diode book. But I was not the lead author. Ralph Campbell wrote that book. I didn't know Ralph. It was I don't want to insult Ralph, but Ralph was not the world's best writer. So they hired me to redo the book.
sure.
And I added, half of the chapters are original, brand new, and the circuits were brand new, the photographs and so on. But that was my first project with Ralph Campbell. After that, I wrote one of the world's first books on two of them on light emitting diodes. This is back in the late 60s,
Oh, wow. Yeah, when
early
LEDs were
70s.
really, really new still,
Oh yeah,
right?
well,
Yeah.
when I was in 1960s, in March of '66, my great grandfather was blind. In fact, I visited where he was blinded in an explosion, helping build a railroad track in North Texas in a remote location, and I actually got to drive the train part of the way to that location. He impressed me with his ability to count utility poles, telephone poles, walking along a gravel road while I was an 11-year-old kid. And so when I got into college, I thought, how could I build something to help him navigate beyond a cane? And I
Hmm.
was already building guided rockets, and I built an analog computer that translated languages by then. So I designed a travel aid for the blind that would use a infrared light emitting diode, which were brand new at the time, and it would send out a powerful series of bursts of infrared, and then that would be detected by a silicon solar cell. The whole thing, I should have brought it to show you. It was tiny. It was 2.5 inches long, an inch square. And I hitchhiked to Texas. Texas Aggies hitchhike. I hitchhiked to Texas A&M in Dallas, and they gave me three of these for free. They cost $365 each back then. They were so impressed by the project, they gave me three. Later, they gave me three more, and that became that aid for the blind, and that really got me started into sophisticated electronics.
Very interesting.
In fact, the pulse generator for the light emitting diode, I use that to make a light generator for my rocket experiments. And so I was launching these rockets. They would go up at night. You'd photograph the flame trail to see the guidance. These are guided rockets,
Hmm.
very tiny guided rockets. And make that long story short, uh, that evolved into a transistorized light flasher using the circuit for the aid for the blind, so that the rocket, when it's coming down, it go flash, flash, flash. So I could frequently just stand there and catch it as it landed because I could see the flashing. That light flasher became my first magazine article, how to make a transistorized light flasher for model rockets in Model Rocketry magazine. When that was published, I then worked at the Air Force Weapons Lab in the Laser Division. I was just a young first lieutenant. My buddy was Ed Roberts. He also worked there after I was assigned there. And he saw that article, and we both said at the same time, this is the company that we both want to start. That's how we got started with making MITs, MITS, Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems Incorporated. And that
Okay.
became the company that started Microsoft.
Huh. Wow. So I'm going to step back a little farther. You mentioned you were a lieutenant in the Air Force. So is that sort of what sparked your electronics interest at that point, or?
I was doing all the electronics on the side. My degree is in government. I majored in government in college. I never took a technical course. I at the school newspaper did a front page story about my aid for the blind. So the vice president for research at Texas A&M, Andrew Settle, he contacted me, had me visit his office, and he said, "You've got to stay here and get a double E degree." I said, "But I'm graduating in 2 months." He said, "I want you to stop those plans and get a double E degree. You've got the ability." and so I said, I will go by the Double E building and then get back to you. So I went by the Double E Electrical Engineering building. I walked in, and the first open door, there were we're all cadets back then. All these cadets were standing at these workbenches building vacuum tube circuits when I was working with sophisticated light emitting diodes that they'd never even heard of.
Mm-hmm.
So I was so happy. I went back to my dorm room. I was sending my voice 1,000 feet across the campus with a light beam transmitter and all this electronic stuff. And I told the nice vice president for research that, no, sir, I'm going to stay where I am and go in the Air Force. And all this is just a hobby.
Uh-huh.
It became a lot more than a hobby.
Yeah, quite obviously, yes. Huh. That's amazing. Well, and so many people go to college and get a degree in one thing and then end up doing something completely different in the end. That's not an uncommon story. I know we've heard. Um, so I've heard model rocketry, obviously electronics and LEDs and photo electronic things. I pulled up a couple of topics of things that you've written about or covered over the years, like your 50 years of monitoring a changing atmosphere, the story of Hawaii's Mauna Loa Observatory, model rocket telemetry, a remote control camera that catches the wind and captures the landscape, measuring the radiation at the top of the Earth's atmosphere. I'm sensing a little bit of a theme with electronics and something in the air.
Okay, you've covered some. Let's go to Mauna Loa Observatory.
Sure, I know. I threw a whole bunch on the wall right there. Sure.
Well, first of all, Radio Shack. This is my last Radio Shack project. This is the Radio Shack Sun and Sky Station.
Huh.
And this measures 4 different colors of light using LEDs as light detectors, not emitters. Nobody knows that. But the LED can detect light. It's a very nice photodiode, but it doesn't have to have a filter. So a green LED will detect green light.
So sort of like a speaker is not a very good microphone, but it can pick up kind of the same thing, an LED in reverse.
You've just entered my private life. That's exactly how I came up with this idea.
Okay.
The speakers and microphones can do the same thing.
Sure.
And so this thing here, you put this lid on like this. This is a collimates the light coming in. And so with this, every day at solar noon, if there's not clouds, like I'll be able to go out later and do my measurements for today that should have been done at noon when it was cloudy. This measures sunlight very accurately. This particular instrument is 23 years old. That's when they sold 12,000 of these. And what's fascinating about it is they sold these for $29.
Wow.
But it's a full-scale light measuring device for 4 wavelengths of sunlight. So I'm using it for all sorts of sophisticated things I'll tell you about later. Now, back to Mauna Loa Observatory, I calibrate all this stuff at the Mauna Loa Observatory. So they, are you aware of how I was fired from Scientific American magazine?
I'm familiar. Yes.
Okay. So Scientific American approved my proposal to take over the amateur scientist column. And then they flew me to New York and I met with them. It's a long story. It's all over the news media back then. This has been back, a long time ago, and the late 80s. And so I was going to write the amateur scientist column, but in the conversation, the editor was asking me all sorts of leading questions about, do I believe in God type questions, and I do, and that sort of thing. And he said, well, we're going to reconsider this and think it over. Meanwhile, he flew me to New York because he wrote me all these praise letters about how cool I was. Make a long story short, they didn't hire me. I went to the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, all 3 of which published major articles about this. And so that really sort of transformed my career. But the government people who hired me, they didn't care what I believed. They believed the same things. I went to a meeting at NASA. I was doing ozone measurements with a homemade ozone instrument, which became, we talk later, it evolved into microtops. And I was measuring ozone very accurately enough to find an error in NASA's ozone satellite.
Really?
That made, I got a Rolex prize for that. And I wrote a paper that was my first paper in the journal Nature, the world's leading science journal. So those things help. Well, as part of all that, I got to go to, I went to Hawaii to give a talk about this to a group of scientists who are Christians. I've forgotten the name of their organization. And I gave this talk, and the president of the University of the Nations was there. And then he interviewed me, and they had me come in once a year for 18 years and teach a 1 week course for their students on science. And so I would stay an extra week, and I would calibrate my instruments at Hawaii's Mauna Loa Observatory. I since spent more nights up at that place than any human being, 234 nights. And my wife and I got to meet the founder. We were present for his 100th birthday. He wrote the preface to the book. He was very kind to me in his preface. So this book is sort of, it took 4 years to write this book. This sort of climaxes my science career in those terms. And then more recent, I've also written 2 memoirs. The first one, I got an advance of $50,000 from McGraw-Hill for a memoir because of my computer connections and all that. The book
Okay.
was a complete flop. It came out right at the middle of the big disaster in the computer book industry. So the $50,000 they gave me didn't go very far for them, but it sure helped me. That was my
Sure.
first memoir. It's called Silly Connections. This is my current memoir, uh, and this has all the questions you're asking me are answered in this book.
Well, okay then. I think we have a good supplement to refer to.
Now, I got off on this thing about Mauna Loa Observatory. I calibrate my instruments there. Now
Mhm.
the lava. I haven't been since 2018 because the big volcano covered the road with 30 feet of lava for a
Mm.
mile. They just got the road reopened, but only 30% of the apparatus is working, and the lidars are not working. Well, I'm fascinated by lidar because you mentioned my work in the upper atmosphere. So, for example, I got a grant from NASA to build 5 twilight photometers. And these devices here, uh, you point this at the sky at sunset, exactly at sunset, or an hour before sunrise in the morning. And so the little telescope here, the lens here, is looking straight up at the sky as the twilight glow goes higher and higher. In other words, at sunset, when you first see the sun sitting on the horizon, everything's illuminated. As
Mhm.
soon as the sun starts going down, you're in the shadow of the earth.
Right.
Okay. And it goes higher and higher and higher. Well, then you can calculate how high the shadow of the earth is. Well, if you're measuring the light from the shadow of the earth, you can calculate the altitude of all kinds of stuff. So, for example, some typical plots that I would measure of different things causing aerosols from the ground to 100 kilometers. So I can, for example, here I can tell you that at 20 kilometers, there's a nice stable pulse to the right. And that was discovered by an Air Force researcher many years ago. His last name was Jung, Junge. It's called the Jung layer. Nobody knew about that until he studied that with balloons. Well,
Huh.
I measured every night with my homemade instruments, and and then Rolex gave me a grant. I don't. I've been really fortunate because I don't have the money to develop all this. Since I won a Rolex prize, they gave me a grant to go to Hawaii and do an ultraviolet survey of Hawaii Island from below the water to the top of the mountain. Nobody'd
Mm.
ever done that. So that became a really interesting paper. That's a paper on the web. And then they also financed, this is all built with Rolex components. There's 2 sun photometers that do exactly what that NASA unit does I just showed you. And I've got 2 others that are much bigger that are the size of the NASA unit. They each have 2 optics also. So they got lenses on the end. And inside the lens is a little tiny 1-inch diameter circuit board with an op amp that is so sensitive, it's not called an op amp. It's called a femto amp, meaning it can magnify trillions of a volt.
Oh,
And
wow.
so these can see extremely low light uh, from the sky. And that's what measured these. And let me see, I think there's another. Here's the bigger one. Now, this shows data from my site and Padre Island. Padre is in blue and my site is in red. And they were made real close together in terms of time. So, but you can see some interesting differences in the altitude effects of the 2 different locations where, uh, Padre's on the ocean. And so it's going to obviously have different phenomena. Now, both of these fizzle out beginning at around 35 kilometers. And the sky
Okay.
is very, very clear above that. But I don't think I brought any to show you, but I detect meteor smoke. Uh, I would say meteor smoke is once a month, but now I'm
Okay.
detecting collapsing satellites. And I got a really interesting one the other day. What is it? What is bus company? What are those called? That where you have a satellite receiver on your home?
Oh,
Uh,
like a Direct TV or no Starlink or
yeah,
one of those. Yeah,
Starlink. Starlink.
Starlink. Yeah,
Starlink is losing up to four a day of their eight
really.
thousand satellites, and when every time and those things weigh 500 pounds, so they're not little meteors, and so they're leaving behind lots of debris. Uh, and 2 years ago, the Russians blew up Cosmos, I think it's 1408, with their anti-satellite missile, and that was at 515 kilometers. The next day, I was detecting all sorts of spikes in my data at 450 to 500 kilometers. In other words, I was detecting the debris from that Russian satellite with an instrument that cost $150. Plus the data logger, there's a data logger on the side here. See that box there, that white box? That's
Yeah.
$220. That's the most, but I'm using it with two instruments. But boy, last night I got a huge amount of spikes, unlike I've never seen before. And so it looks like maybe a Starlink may have broken up nearby overhead. I don't know. I have no idea. And what's funny about this, notice that nobody else does either. They're
Hmm.
tracking all these objects, but when one crashes like this, they don't necessarily know about it because it was there one day and all of a sudden it's just gone. They don't see it collapsing through the atmosphere like I'm seeing. It's a
Interesting.
very unexpected aspect of my work. Another thing I'm doing is I'm detecting the peak of the ozone layer. And you can do that with a red LED that's used in car taillights.
Hmm.
Don't tell anybody I told you that. We know that the ozone layer absorbs ultraviolet, right?
Right.
The ozone layer also absorbs red and orange light, and so that's called the Chafoui band. It was discovered over 100 years ago that ozone absorbs in that color of light. Well, that color of light is right in the middle of the optical spectrum. So here we have the red dots are the sensitivity of my LED, and the solid line is the Chafoui layer discovered over 100 years ago that shows the absorption of light. You can see there's a very close match.
Yep.
And so with my, I'm now concentrating on making, I didn't bring a trace to show you, but making traces that show a bulge at the top of the ozone layer, typically 22 to 23, 24 kilometers. Why is that important? I don't know. All I know is that when I start doing something like this, something important will creep into it.
So all this, how long have you been collecting this atmospheric data?
The I began doing the daily work when I say daily, when the sun shines, um, in on January, I'm sorry, February the 4th of 1990. So I've got 36 years
Wow. Okay.
of data, but I published a paper on the first 30 years and other papers on shorter terms. But I published a major paper in Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society on the 30 years of data. And that got some. By the way, that went through three peer reviewers. They just chewed me up, but they finally agreed that it was valid data. I'm using these cheap homemade instruments, and that's what through them. They're not used to that. They're used to papers that cost millions of dollars.
Sure.
Uh, Here's what I use. This instrument here is a homemade sun photometer. I built this in the fall of 1989, and this is one of the four LEDs mounted in a phone plug, and you're a radio guy, so you know exactly what that is. And it plugs into
Cool.
this, and inside is an op amp, and you can switch it to any of the four diodes there. And so I've got one diode is a 970 nanometer diode that measures the water vapor in the sky. The other one just measures the total aerosols. So
Okay.
this thing is used every day with a voltmeter that plugs in here, and I can adjust which of the diodes I'm looking at here. And over here, I can adjust the gain, which is typically 10 to the fifth, because these things you don't need a femto amplifier. There's so much direct sunlight. When you're doing twilight work, this wouldn't measure anything. But
Sure.
my femto amplifiers are extremely sensitive. But this is built on my son's birthday, and I keep it in here to avoid any dust on the sensors, and then periodically I change the sandwich bag.
Wow. So what are some of the applications, all this data you've collected? Who's been
Okay,
using it and what do they do with it?
the with that data with that instrument I just showed you, I have 36 years of optical depth of the atmosphere. In other words, how much is sunlight reduced by junk in the sky? And in the 30-year paper that was published in BAMS, I should have brought. You can see this. It's free online. It shows a distinct decline over these 30 years, a slight decline. Well, what caused that? Because it didn't start at the beginning. It kind of started in the middle. When they started shutting down the coal-burning power plants because of everybody being worried about global warming,
Mm-hmm.
it shut down the carbon deposited all over my instruments. For 22 years, I've been in charge of some instruments on the roof of a nearby college. This is a Colorado State project funded by the Department of Agriculture, and they've got UV instruments, and they have one of my instruments, a $20,000 instrument, has got 7 LEDs in it. That's the only one in the world like that. It's been operating for over 20 years. That thing, I had to go once a week to clean it. Well, with the coal burning power plants, every week there was a layer of black dust on every one of the sensors.
Mm-hmm.
You'd put a Q-tip with water, the ionized water, and you'd clean it off, and bingo, the Q-tip is black. Ever since they shut down 2 of those plants, I don't even have to go up there. I go anyway, but they're never dirty, never. So that's one finding. The second finding, that's not controversial. The second finding is controversial. The total column water vapor from February of 1990 until I wrote the paper precisely 30 years later, the column water vapor, the mean, the average is perfectly flat. There is a 0.0 trend, but the data go like this. So you have the El Ninos and different phenomena that cause increases and decreases in water vapor, but the overall average is perfectly flat. Well, water vapor is a key and the chief greenhouse gas. So I began researching this. The Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory had a lab at Table Mountain, California. They did exactly what I was doing from 1923 to 1957. So I've now got a longer data than they did. Their column water vapor, I know the man who processed the data. He wasn't alive then, but Robert Rusin. They published the results. Their water vapor was perfectly flat. It had the ups and downs, perfectly flat. So here you have the chief greenhouse gas from 1923 to when I was doing it has not changed its average amount of absorption in the atmosphere. It's been flat. So it's the key greenhouse gas, but it's not having an impact on changes in global temperature.
Right.
And some of the global warming guys get real mad at me when I say that. And I say, I just have to tell you what my data, I don't have an agenda. That's just what my data shows.
Right.
And let's see, the ozone layer, I measured the ultraviolet also, that's in that paper. The ozone layer declined because of human activity, the air spray and the aerosol air sprays and all that. But it's recovered significantly over my 30 years. It's not quite up to what it was, but it's very close to what it was 30 years ago.
Interesting. Very interesting. Any other projects you want to talk about? I mean, that alone, we could keep going on that, but I've got your website up, forrestmims.org, and there's a lot of information up there of projects and things that you've done, some selected scientific and technical publications. I mean, this is a heck of a list of things. I tried to pull a few, and I thought, I'll just let you decide. I mean, is there anything else that you've accomplished in this list that you think is worthy of a mention?
I've made hundreds of instruments, different kinds, but the ones of most interest are the ones I use on a daily basis.
Sure.
And so I'm 82. I'm going to be 82 in September. Okay, so I got to recognize there's going to be at some point this has to come to an end. And so I'm trying to think what will be the most important. Well, obviously, continuing this till I prayed to God to give me 50 years of data, and that would be nice. Nobody's ever done that.
Sure.
And then the second thing is this twilight thing is just really. I'll do it. It's going to be clear tonight. I'm going to go out there and check the twilight. You never know what you're going to see, and so I'm not building a new instrument every night, but I'm seeing some new data every night. I just got back from New Mexico. Sunspot Solar Observatory, and I've measured there over the years, and I calibrated those instruments I just showed you, plus 2 others, plus the NASA instrument. Mm-hmm. I built 5 of those I didn't build them. I hired out a guy to build 5 of those for NASA, and I've had 2 of them ever since because NASA likes what I'm doing with them, And they're thinking, well, it says property of U.S. government. It's not my property. So I calibrated these things at Sunspot. But you said other projects. Here's the problem with Sunspot. Uh, they're famous for the Dunn Solar Telescope. At one time, the world's most important solar telescope. The thing is like almost a 200-foot high tower, 160 feet high tower. Then it goes several hundred feet underground. There's a mercury reservoir, and so the telescope floats on that mercury. The thing developed a leak a couple of months ago, and some of the mercury was coming out. So that put everybody in a panic. The problem is the National Science Foundation is trying to close Sunspot. This gave them the perfect avenue to help close it because the other three telescopes there are not in use. Sunspot is historic because the Big Dome telescope is where Ralph Stair was trying to measure the optical depth of the sky in 1954 with his big fancy instruments. And White Sands, New Mexico is just west of this, and it was blowing a big cloud of dust over the mountain, and he couldn't do his measurements. He was quite hacked. Meanwhile, Ralph Simpson, the new head of the National Hurricane Observatory, arrived to visit with Ralph Stair and meet him and find out what he was up to before he began his hurricane science. It's Mr. Simpson, Dr. Simpson wrote that forward to that big, thick Mauna Loa book. Mm-hmm. The conversation resulted in the foundation of Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii in 1954 because Stair got a $20,000 grant from the hurricane people to build that observatory. And that was thanks to Ralph Simpson. Ralph Simpson had put an observatory on the top of Mauna Loa, but it only lasted a few years because nobody could get up there. So the one they built down today, it's called the Slope Observatory because it's not at 13,000 feet; it's at 11,200 feet. So that was a big deal. And as far as other projects, getting to do something different, that working with these guys at the Mauna Loa Observatory, calibrating my own personal instruments there, and looking forward to going back. That's a completely different aspect of my science.
Yeah, I'll say. This is just fascinating. I'm not even quite sure where to go next to try to get all this together. I will offer, one comment, especially if we have younger people watching, that what you're telling me is you're never too old to learn something new. Sounds like
yes,
what
sir.
you're doing continues to evolve. You're picking things up along the way and expanding your scientific horizons as well. Especially,
I hadn't thought of it. You just made me think about something. And it's because the words along the way. In my case, every day at noon and every evening at twilight, and I often do, in the winter, I'll do the morning twilights too. I don't know what I'm going to find. So that's along the way. In other words, I'm building a basic set of instruments that I can use for the rest of my life, providing completely new information. The government doesn't have any twilight photometers. The only people using these things, and they're much bigger than mine. I mean, they're the size of a closet. There's some guys in Russia were doing it. I don't know if they still are. There's some scientists in India that were using it, in fact, I've used some of their equations to calculate the height of the aerosol layer. I don't know if they still are, but they did some really good papers, and that's about it. I'm the only guy in the U.S. from on this side of the world, from the North Pole to the South Pole, doing this with instruments that somebody could build for $400 with a data logger. I'm hoping to motivate people to do that and be able to continue to collecting data long after I'm gone. And meanwhile, you saw the difference between Padre Island and then where I live, 150 miles inland. People need to be studying this. Satellites do it, but the satellite data is so hard to retrieve. They show you pictures of the data, but they don't like to show you tables of it because nobody can figure out, what their latitude and longitude and the data really means. So with my instrument, school kids could be doing this for science fair projects.
Maybe it's your next hand-lettered book.
I hadn't thought about that. You just gave me an idea.
I expect a royalty if you end up publishing it. If you sell 7 million copies, I'll take a penny a copy.
I'll give you a credit line. And by the way, being open to nature is really important. Our youngest daughter, all three of our kids did science projects. All three, my son built an incredible seismometer that detected 2 underground nuclear tests in Nevada from his bedroom. I'm looking in his bedroom over here. Our oldest daughter we're having a big solar flares right now. At that time, the sun is acting up. She detected one of the largest solar flares in history, an X12 class solar flare, using a Geiger counter that I loaned her. I assumed that it would detect solar flares, and so we contacted a professor, a scientist I know, and no, it will not detect solar flares. It does detect solar flares. And don't ask me all the mechanisms involved, but she did a fabulous science project. And then Sarah did a whole series of projects, the latest of which she's now, working for industry and all that. But when she was a sophomore, she became the first human being to discover that smoke from biomass fires is loaded with bacteria and fungi. It's just loaded with it. And
Hmm.
so she was detecting this with a microscope slide that she flew in a kite and with a plastic cup, and the smoke was coming from Yucatan. And so, but we couldn't, or she couldn't. Is it maybe coming from inland between the coast and where we live, or is it coming from across the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America? So we drove her down to the coast twice. Once when there was smoke, and once when there wasn't. The smoke was coming from Yucatan. And so I called a professor, I won't name the university, but a famous university. He said there's no way that these bacteria could survive a fire. And I thanked him, and I told my daughter, that's because they're not being burned. And you look at a fire, you get smoke in the middle that's very hot, but you get lots of smoke out the side that goes just as high. And that's
Sure.
loaded with bacteria and microbes. So she
Interesting.
discovered that. That became her first scientific paper in the 11th grade, peer reviewed. It was published in Atmospheric Environment as the lead paper because it was one of the most major discoveries ever made for that journal.
Well, now I feel like a slacker. I was, building op amp circuits from a book this guy wrote in the 80s. And
Hey, and by the way, with your present position, I expect great things to come out of you. You're going to think of some shortcuts that nobody else has ever thought of before.
I hope so. I hope so. This has been interesting and entertaining both at the same time. Is there anything we haven't covered that you would like to mention before we sign off?
Uh, the one thing I would tell you is that I get a lot of people love what I do, but then there's a very small minority that think I'm an absolute idiot because I believe in creation. I don't believe that evolution is the end product of everything that we see around us. I believe that it was created, and the more I study DNA, the more obvious that becomes. So that's the another angle of my. I don't get into this. I'm going to start writing about it at some point, but there's excellent books out there already. I don't need to write those. But I've met some brilliant scientists whose views I share. William Dembski is a classic example. The guy's got multiple PhDs, and he's explained mathematically and statistically the odds for evolution happening are essentially zilch. Now, you
Hmm.
might have evolution, like, say, with dogs, but they're still dogs. They don't evolve into cats. And so he explains all of that in a mathematical sense.
Interesting. Very good. Well, again, I can't thank you enough for taking some time today. As I said, and when I mentioned to some friends that I was going to be talking to you, they all got very excited because of our shared start with your books and your work that we some of us cut our teeth on in electronics. And if you're a younger person watching or listening, look these up. They're great resources. You don't always have to do it with a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino. You can do it a lot quicker and simpler with a couple op amps and maybe a timer chip or something like that, a opto isolator, who knows what. So,
I've
um,
really enjoyed your questions because mostly I'm interviewed by people who don't do what you do. And so your questions are far more relevant, and I really enjoyed the interview.
well, broadcast engineers, I'm not saying we're unique and nobody else is like us, but we do cover a lot of things. I mean, we're not just electronics. We're not just, um, I mean, we obviously don't do the day to day, but it's DC to daylight is kind of what we're covering, and it's
Mm-hmm.
microphone to antenna. So at the same time, the broadcast engineer at the station, we're the first contact for the plumber, for the roofer, for the AC.
Yep.
So we tend to pick up a lot of stuff along the way that isn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily audio and video amplifiers or recording and playback stuff. So I like to think that we're a diverse group of interests and skills.
Yeah.
And that's why, like I said, I wanted to talk to you because you're one of us, if I can.
May I mention you on Facebook, on my Facebook
Absolutely.
page? I'll do
Absolutely.
that. And you can tell your guys that you can go backtracking on my Facebook and see all kinds of stuff about my science.
Which I've been doing now that I've discovered you on Facebook. So I'm a total fanboy. I'll admit that. So, Well, again, thanks very much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Forrest Mims. I know I did. After the interview, he shared a story with me that I wanted to share. It involves his first one-transistor radio. He said in 1957, his mother told her 5 children they could each select one Christmas present up to $10. Forrest immediately picked up the Lafayette Electronics catalog and selected the parts for his first one-transistor radio. He says the full story in his book, Maverick Scientist, but he's proud that the radio worked the first time he connected the battery. He said that this success led him to visiting hearing aid dealers in downtown Houston to request old hearing aids, which he then repaired. He later made a transistor radio from an old behind-the-ears hearing aid and pinned it to his uniform while walking to class at Texas A&M. So as I said, I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did. You can learn more about him in his book, Maverick Scientist. As broadcast engineers, we typically have a wide range of technical and scientific interests and often apply these varied skills in our daily jobs. I know lots of broadcast engineers with scientific minds just like Forrest's. So thanks for watching the SBE WEBxtra, the SBE chapter of the web from the Society of Broadcast Engineers, the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals. If you have an idea for a topic or a guest for the SBE WEBxtra, send it to webextra@sbe.org. Thanks again to Forrest Mims for joining me today. If you hold SBE certification, viewing the SBE WEBxtra qualifies you for 1/2 point in Category G. That's attendance, just like attending a local chapter meeting. Thanks again for watching. I'm Chris Scherer, SBE Communications Director. See you next month.